Good afternoon, and welcome to INSEAD Impact Entrepreneurship Forum. I'm Maria from INSEAD Hoffman Institute, and it's my pleasure and huge honor to be your master of ceremony today. Before we dive in, a little context on how we got here. INSEAD became the academic partner of ChangeNOW in 2018. It's our 8th consecutive year together, and we moved through chapters and stages, and through all of it we brought our top faculty and practitioners to the audiences like this one to share research and practice grounded knowledge here. So I see a lot of familiar faces. I also see many new faces, and also such a pleasure to see so many partners and collaborators from organizations whose work we follow and respect a lot. To all of you, thank you a lot for being here and welcome. So what today is about? Each year we select a theme and explore a theme that reflects of where the world is heading. And this year our focus is on future fit impact in post-multilateral era. We know that the rules of global cooperation are being rewritten. We do not know where it's going yet. Perhaps it's a fracture, as it was pointed earlier this year by McCartney, or maybe by redesign of different systems. But the ground beneath social innovation is shifting in ways that are difficult to predict, hence difficult to manage and navigate. So how do social innovators adapt, plan, strategize, make impact if the context is constantly changing? And also, how do we create impact ecosystems and partnerships that are effective and also anticipatory? So these are just some of the questions we'll be sitting with today. We do not expect any easy answers, but we do hope to have an honest research and practice grounded conversations, and also share some business frameworks and methodologies that you can use in your work. So how it's going to work exactly? We will have 2 panels, 1 presentation. We will have some special guests opening and closing the forum. As always, we do invite you to engage fully, to ask questions, to challenge us, to push back. The space is yours. And with that, let's begin. It's my huge pleasure to invite the Dean of INSEAD, Francisco Veloso, to open the forum. Francisco, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maria. Delighted to be here with all of you, opening up the forum. Although one of the things that you notice when you're on this side of the stage is that I can't really see you. That's the things about being on stage with strong lights. But I know you're there. I see some of you through the lights. But really, I mean, this is a partnership that, as Maria mentioned, started 8 years ago when ChangeNOW started, and it means a lot to us for a variety of different reasons. One has to do with our academic mission and with the mission of ChangeNOW, and that's why we were present from the beginning, because this notion of impact, this notion of making a difference now, to create that platform is something that's very important for us as we think about our own role as an academic institution. INSEAD is and always has been an institution that cares deeply about the academic element, about the rigor, about the research, but also very much about the practice, about the relevance, about the impact. These are things that are very dear, to our identity, to the way that we think, and that we, practice what we do through our students, through our community, through our executive education, through our research, and through our impact. And therefore, ChangeNOW, is something that, we've been working with, and especially with this notion of how do you really think about a business school as a force for good, as wanting to make a difference in society, and connecting through this platform is really something that we're very proud and very happy to be part of. And that connects to our identity in a particular way in terms of the topic that you have today, with this notion of the post-multilateralism. Because, yes, INSEAD is the business school for the world. It's a school that is present, not only here in Europe, but also in the Middle East and in Asia, and a presence also in North America. And the thing that's important is that over the last few years, we gotten used to the idea that the world was flattening out, and that perhaps the role of our school was associated with, these, more, horizontal, this flattening of the world. And now, as we go through this post-multilateralism environment, things are a little bit different. But that actually brings us back to the original identity of INSEAD, which was not in that world. I mean, when INSEAD was created in 1957, the world was a very different world. It was a much more fractured world. In fact, even here in Europe, when we were created, it was on the back of World War II, where there were the relationships between countries, between people, between regions was still very tender. And we were created to build those bridges. So when I think about the role of INSEAD today, it actually brings back to that identity, to that idea that we can and should be building bridges to go over these fractures, to connect the different publics, to make a difference in the world and to make a difference, in a way that is really driving impact. And this is why we're very happy to be here, to be part of ChangeNOW, and to be, having this impact entrepreneurship forum with all of you, and to do it in a way that opens it up to a broader community. And it's important because we know the importance that the social entrepreneurs have. There's a variety of ways to look at that, but even recently the Schwab Foundation did a nice report looking at over 500 social innovators and how they touched almost 1 billion people. I mean, this is a really significant, impact that this group has. And that's what makes us, very connected and very motivated and mobilized to engage and to work with all of you, these changers, those of you that are making a difference out there every day and thinking, how can you amplify and scale that impact to have even greater relevance, greater, contribution to the world. And that's what we do here. We do here through a variety of ways, through education, through engagement, through research, the tools that are part of academia, and that includes executive education. For example, we have the Cartier's Women Initiative, of one of the many initiatives that we can have, and that's why we're hosting this forum here today with all of you, bringing together fellows, graduates, and alumni, all working to create impact through entrepreneurship and through societal change. And today, we also open it up to the broader ChangeNOW community, so we have many others that are not part of the INSEAD community already, but we're very happy to bring you, into our community and to be part of this exchange and to be part of this effort. So that's what I wanted to share with all of you as part of the opening, how proud we are, how delighted to have you here, and wishing you all a wonderful session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francisco, for getting us started. We have one more very special guest to give opening address. It's Rose Meillecot, who is the co-founder of ChangeNOW and CEO. Rose, welcome. Rose. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to ChangeNOW. Welcome to this fantastic afternoon with INSEAD. We are really proud to partner together, to be partners since so many years, 8 years, yes. And I hope you are enjoying your time here, enjoying the summit. So INSEAD holds a very special place for us at ChangeNOW, not only as a long-standing partner, but also as a community we are personally connected to. My 2 co-founders studied there, and I've personally experienced it from very close as an INSEAD partner and through a rather unique moment of life, living with my husband in Fontainebleau for a year in a house with 16 people from all over the world. And I think that says a lot about what INSEAD represents. A place where you don't just study global business, but you actually live global diversity, collaboration, and complexity every single day. Which is why the topic of today's forum feels especially relevant. When you come from such an international environment, reflecting on a post-multilateral world is not just theoretical, it's highly strategic. Because at the end of the day, the challenges we are trying to address, climate, biodiversity, inequality, access to resources, do not stop at borders. And this is exactly why we created ChangeNOW almost 10 years ago, with an international scale, because impact challenges are global by nature, and that solutions must be shared, discussed, and scaled at global level. And this remains true, regardless of how the global landscapes evolves. At its core, ChangeNOW is about collaboration, bringing together multiple stakeholders from different sectors, countries, and perspectives to work towards common solutions. So how do we continue to build impact models that are resilient, credible, and scalable, even if in a world that may be less coordinated than before? Thank you, INSEAD, for bringing this topic to the table and for creating a space to explore both big picture questions and practical solutions. I wish you all great discussions, meaningful connections, and inspiring perspectives. Thank you very much and good afternoon.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. Yeah, I'll see you later. Thanks to Rose and Francisco to get us started. I'm about to introduce the next panel. Last week, we actually launched this forum with our virtual edition that we do every year, and we already started talking about coalitions and impact ecosystems. And some of the questions were how to make them more trustworthy, how to benefit from them. And this next panel will dive into these questions. To introduce the speakers and to chair the panel, it's my pleasure to invite to the stage Laurence Guyen, who is a social entrepreneur, leader, and INSEAD graduate. Laurence, the floor is yours. Over to you.
Ça marche. Thanks, Maria. Hello, everyone. I know it's after lunch, and I know that some of you are here since 2 days very tired. Please don't feel slept, because, I mean, the persons who are coming now, they are very interesting. So I will make a quiz after, just to follow, to be sure that you understood everything. So let me introduce you first. Andrew, here, Shipilov, sorry, who is Professor of Strategy and Board Member at INSEAD. Then Halil, who is French director of One Campaign. And Valeria, who created since 20 years Ecosystem. She's Impact Executive Leader, and she's council member at Catalyst. So we're gonna start with Andrew, because then he's gonna explain this concept, which maybe some of you don't understand, even if you don't want to say it. So Andrew, what are the key insights social entrepreneur can get from a strategic courses with you?
All right, so the bar is really high. So what could I, from my conversations with social entrepreneurs, both during this forum and also before, I think that in a business school we teach frameworks, strategy frameworks, which are mostly 90% usable for social entrepreneurship. How would I teach strategy to a group of executives or to the group of MBA students? One would probably need to start with the external environment assessment. So what's happening around the organization? Then you would probably want to look inside the organization and ask what strengths and weaknesses do we have to deal with opportunities and threats that the external environment throws at us. And that suspiciously sounds like a SWOT analysis, and it is what it is. It's basically, in my career, I don't think there is a better tool that has been invented in strategy since SWOT. It's a framework to think about opportunities and threats that come to us from the outside and think about the strengths and weaknesses which we have in our organization. I think if you're a social entrepreneur or if you are an entrepreneur in the classical sort of for-profit sense, you would still need to have that kind of understanding. That doesn't matter which business you operate. Now then you also want to say, okay, there's probably a gap between what I want to do and what I can do. And then you ask yourself, how do you fill that gap? You could fill that gap by probably developing your own resources and capabilities, or you may go outside and try to fill that gap through some sort of alliances and partnerships and ecosystems. In a kind of for-profit business, you have the third strategy, which means you could buy somebody and acquire. I don't think in social enterprise that's a common thing to buy an external firm. But other than that, it's the same, right? You've got a gap, you have to fill it. So how do you fill that gap? Again, you could either partner with somebody or you could join an ecosystem. So what's the difference between a partnership and an ecosystem? Partnerships are typically bilateral or trilateral. So I'll say, INSEAD works with Wharton, INSEAD works with ChangeNOW. So these are typically, kind of relationships, and you can count number of partners, 1, 2, 3, 4 maximum. That's a partnership. An ecosystem is a lot broader. It's this collection of organizations which are united. And if I were to teach in the for-profit sense, I would say around the value proposition. But I would argue that for social enterprise, you also need to offer a value proposition, which is why are we gathering around this specific issue that we want to resolve? Are we resolving the problem of climate change? Are we trying to resolve the problem of poverty in suburban parts of big cities? What is that value proposition of that ecosystem to come together? So you see here, again, it's very, very similar. You need the value proposition for a business ecosystem, for a for-profit or social enterprise. You need that. Now, what is the difference between a partnership and ecosystem? An ecosystem, you need to set up some kind of general rules of the game as an orchestrator of the ecosystem. Why would other organizations join you? And we're not talking about 1 or 2 or 3 organizations. We're talking about many, many, many organizations, and that's the difference. In an ecosystem, we could have 10, 15, 20, 30, 100 entities which are organized around you, around your value proposition. In an alliance or a partnership, you have many, many fewer. And then you need in an ecosystem to set up some kind of a governance mechanism. So what are the principles that bring us together? How do we handle conflict? How do we decide? How do we think about, so what should this entity do in the future? What is the business model for an ecosystem? And I think even in a social enterprise, you need a business model in a sense, how do I attract external resources? That could be through grants, that could be in collaboration with companies. Doesn't matter, but you need to solve that problem of monetization, resource acquisition, both in the for-profit and the non-for-profit way as well. Now again, the similar thing about ecosystems across different contexts is that many organizations may fantasize to be the orchestrator of an ecosystem, this kind of Apple or Microsoft or the United Nations, which sort of orchestrates this entire collection of participants, but very few can actually pull that off. And I think there's just as I would teach for the for the executive education participants in the in any program at INSEAD, there's no shame of being a part of an ecosystem that somebody has built for you. But you've got to know, of course, what you contribute to that ecosystem. What are the key complementary assets you bring to that ecosystem? And they could be very different in the social enterprise versus elsewhere, but that's, again, the kind of thinking you need to have. So value proposition, resource acquisition, and the added value that you bring to an ecosystem, these are the kinds of questions that you would need to ask as a social entrepreneur. And by the way, some of the societal trends that are kind of affecting businesses in many different ways are working for you as a social entrepreneur in this day and age. So, for example, societies have become a lot more aware of the problems that need to be solved. So climate change, poverty, unequal income distribution. You don't have to persuade people these are the issues. They know these are the issues. So the social enterprise, you're already in that niche. And what was really interesting, when there was this online session last week, somebody asked this really interesting question. So how do you deal with AI bubble as a social enterprise? And my answer was, you actually don't need to deal with an AI bubble. For you, Gen AI is an opportunity because somebody has invested all of this money in generative AI. They took investors, VC money, private equity money, bondholders' money, dumped them in that industry. This industry you can create a lot of value with that industry. You could partner with organizations which kind of create Gen AI models. You can build on top of those things. That allows you to be a part of this broader ecosystem of data exchange, knowledge exchange as a social enterprise that helps you to bring the costs down. So at the end of the day, partnerships, ecosystems, business models, it doesn't matter which business you operate. Social enterprise, non-social enterprise, all of these frameworks are hopefully helping you make more informed decision to solve whatever problem you're trying to solve and to achieve the value proposition, reach the value proposition that you're trying to reach.
Okay, thanks. Let me reframe just to be sure that I understood well and maybe also the public. So according to you, we must focus on value proposition, common value proposition, instead of focusing on competition or maybe topics where we would not be agree. And we must also focus to knowing what our role is in this orchestration, and not everyone can be an orchestrator. I mean, we must be part of biggest orchestration, right? This is what I understood.
Well, I would say even before that, you need to know what your strengths and weaknesses are. And so why you're joining those partnerships, ecosystems, that's the fundamental question. That's why even though SWOT is about 60 years old, I like it very much, or at least the logic. Why are you doing that? You're not doing partnerships or ecosystem for the sake of doing partnerships and ecosystems, right? They're the means to an end. That end is the value proposition. The means is filling up the resource gap. And they would help you work with partners. They would tell you this is a particular way to fill the resource gap as both a social entrepreneur or any kind of other entrepreneur. And I think one of the things which I'm sure people in this audience understand very well, alliances, partnerships, and ecosystems is a particularly interesting way to innovate and co-create. Because you don't have to be everything, right? You could have just this really small part of whatever value chain you're in, and then you can work with others to create much more value through collaborations that you would have been able to do by yourself.
Thanks. Then we're going to talk with Khalil. I think having listened to you, you may have a point of view from his organization as well. So what is the global landscape, according to you, from one campaign?
Thank you, Laurence. So maybe I'll start by filling you in a bit about who we are at the One Campaign. We are an NGO. We campaign for the development, the economic development of Africa and the social development of Africa, so basically jobs in Africa and health and education in Africa. We are led by an African social entrepreneur who made her career in agribusiness, social agribusiness, and we were founded by a rock singer, a famous rock singer, 20 years ago. We influence public policies, so we shoot for very high impact. We shoot like tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people being impacted by what we do, and the way we do that is via influencing public policy. So, for example, we were able to. In the UK, we obtained a law that enshrined that the country would devote 0.7% of its GDP to funding support for poor countries to develop. In the US, we got also a law that mandated that the government would support the electrification of access to electrification for tens of millions of homes in Africa. And in France, a few years ago, we got the government to organize a global health summit that raised $14 billion for providing treatment for HIV, TB, and malaria, mostly in Africa. So that's the kind of things we do. That's where we operate within the broad universe of impact. Challenges that we are going through these days, I'll give you an example. We work a lot on official development assistance, so the budget from the government to support the development and the social sectors in Africa. And this year, we faced in France, so I'm in charge of France within the organization. We're present in the G7 countries and in African capitals. In France, France was the country within the G7 that reduced its contribution to life-saving programs the most, 60% cut to France's contribution to life-saving programs, which came as a shock because actually in the beginning those programs were created by France 25 years ago, and the UK, even the US haven't cut at all they've cut, but not at all at those levels. The US were talking about a 4% cut, so that usually people are surprised to hear that there's such a discrepancy between those two countries, and even in the US and Germany, we're talking 15%. A challenge we've encountered is when we were talking with direct advisors to the top level decision makers in the country, was they were telling us, wait a minute, why is it important to protect life-saving programs within the ODA budget? So to be honest, it's the first time, I've been doing this for a long time, it's the first time that we've encountered that. Like we've encountered, why do human lives matter? From civil servants that are not, they're not from a far right party, they're not extreme at all, and yet that's the kind of feedback we get, and we have to try to and remind them, why human lives matter. No, but it's really special, and it's not something we're encountering to that level in other countries. So we try to, formulate hypotheses. Why are we seeing this in France? We know that in France, the influence of far-right ideas is older than in many other countries, and it seeps through the political spectrum. We are also hearing civil servants tell us China isn't spending any money providing treatment for people in Africa, so perhaps neither should France, neither should rich countries. So we have to explain, well, China doesn't have the same relationship with Africa that Europe has. It doesn't have 20% of its population originating from Africa. It's not, 15 miles separated by the Strait of Gibraltar from Africa. It's a completely different situation. So if Europe was doing the same thing as China, it would probably be an indication that it was doing something wrong. That is bringing us to change the way that we approach what we do compared to what we've been doing in the last, more than 10 years. This year, we're going to be talking less to civil servants that used to be our strong partners. For example, this conference that I mentioned a few years ago, when we raised $14 billion in France for global health, we did that in close partnerships with civil servants, very similar to the one we're talking to today. We're going to decrease the extent to which we engage them because it's not working, and we're going to go back to engaging politicians who don't need an explainer why human lives matter to voters. And again, what's going on in the US is actually an example of that, contrary to what you might think. We're also engaging different constituencies. So last week, there was a national conference held every year on defense. And we had several retired generals that came to us and said, you're right, true security for France is more than just stockpiling weapons. We need to prepare for war in case there's a conflict between Russia and the EU in the next 5 years. But true security is more than just stockpiling weapons. And in terms of how you spend your budget, we as military officials, we really want the government to also invest in the longer game, to invest in diplomacy, to invest in development, international development, reduction of inequalities, reduction of tensions. So we have military allies that say true security is also composed of that. We're also working with major corporates who are coming with us to tell the government. There's a reason why China is favoring so much Africa. Africa has the demographic dividend, the mineral dividend. It's the largest source of mineral wealth on the planet. And also the growth dividend. So that's why China is there. And the message that those corporates are bringing to the government with us is, if you want to be smart, don't let China, keep gaining ground on you. You need to win back lost ground. That means upping your game in Africa, and that means not dropping the continent, and not dropping what makes your added value compared to Africa, which could be, has been so far social sector investment, like health, education, but also supporting Africa to develop up the value chain. China mostly relates to Africa as a source of raw materials, so that's an opportunity for Europe to. So yeah, we're partnering with those kinds of new voices to get politicians to understand that what their advisors are telling them is smart is actually very short-sighted.
Okay, thanks a lot. So I hear that you already adapt your strategy to the new way of thinking, but I have a question. How do you react, and how do you convince people who ask you what is more important, why life are important? This is not business development, it is just a question of value shifting. So how do you react?
Precisely. So the way we react, to be honest, is that we're going to decrease the extent to which we engage with the people who tell us why do human lives matter, and engage more with people who are more like certain civil servants. I'm not, of course, casting aspersion across, 50,000 civil servants. I'm talking about a few people in a few select offices in the 7th arrondissement.
Thanks for the precision. Sorry for the West people.
And we are also, we work on social sector, but a lot of our work also is job creation in Africa. Actually, it's in a way that's equally transformative as saving lives. So on this, what we do is we work to evolve financial regulation in capital-rich countries, so basically G7 countries, if you like, so that there's more incentives for especially institutional investors who manage, like pension funds and insurance companies who manage the bulk of Western capital, to invest this capital in Africa. Our approach has been, there's a data paradox. So actually, Africa, when you look at the data, has the lowest default rate from foreign investments into the continent compared to other continents, including compared to Asia, and highest profitability rate. Those are data from a World Bank outfit called the IFC, and from similar outfits in the US, like the Development Finance Corporation. For a variety of reasons, mostly about business confidentiality, this data is not seeping out. It's kept secret because those are old institutions created for the case of the World Bank in 1944. So they're not used to changing how they do business, and they're used to not sharing data. They're used to evolving in a world where they're the only game in town. But we're getting them to release, little by little, 10% tranche by 10% tranche, the data they're hoarding, and that shows that actually investors' representations about the profitability and risk profile of investing in Africa is actually not supported by data. So we're partnering with Google, for example. You were asking me how we're changing our tactics. We're investing much more in these data arrangements, and we're indeed, we can do, like, it wouldn't work for us to try and become data geniuses overnight. So we are partnering with, in this case, we were fortunate that Google took an interest to build a data agent that basically gets into those databases, sucks out the data, and summarizes it in ways that is digestible for investors and that responds to their information needs. So the geopolitical shifts are already having a huge impact on what we do. Again, we get told, why should France still invest in saving lives in Africa since China doesn't? And that's not something you would have heard even 3 years ago. So the fact that if you look at purchasing power parity, the biggest economy on the planet is not the United States, it's China already. That's having those effects of warping how decision makers perceive problems, perceive risks, and bringing them to conclude human lives don't matter that much anymore. So that's what we're fighting against, and we're fighting fire with fire. We're explaining that official development assistance was never, only about values and helping thy neighbor. It was always about geopolitics. It was created in the 60s when Europe was kicked out of most of its colonies. The UK and France, had to decolonize. And the US and Europe were very afraid at that time that the USSR, which was the biggest geopolitical challenger, were going to scoop up those countries, and that's a big part of why they created the official development assistance system. So we're using that to reconnect decision makers and politicians who sometimes get it faster to the fact that there are geopolitical reasons why to keep saving lives in Africa.
Yeah, thanks a lot. We see the importance of the rebuilding ecosystem, and then that make the bridges with what was mentioned in the first part of the talk. I'm sure there will be questions about this shift of value after, but it will be after. I would like to go with Valeria, who, so Valeria, having heard everything that your colleague have said, how do you, in your daily life and in your activities, make the difference between co-creations and partnerships for yourself?
Thank you, Laurence. Thank you, Halil. Thank you, Andrew. Hi, everyone. Happy to be with you in Paris today. So that's a big conversation, big questions. So just to make sure, because we don't have a lot of time, to make sure that I make that conversation on my hands, because I have a lot of things I would like to tell you, very concrete for who is in the audience. Could I have a quick show of hands to understand who is in the room? So if you identify as an innovator, as a social entrepreneur, could you raise your hand, please? Okay. Educators? Funders? Oh, thank you. That's lovely. Thank you. Funders? The light was okay. We have a bit of everyone. That's great. Business people, more from the corporate world. Oh, wow. That's the biggest crowd. And public sector representative. Okay. And curious people who are just here to listen. Okay. So that's a big crowd too. Okay, thank you. So we have a bit of everyone. So I'll try to bring value to all of you. So, just to answer your question, right? You were mentioning the importance of ecosystem. You were mentioning the importance of working with the multilateral system, and I represent here the people who are working at the level of the grounds, right? Who are actually delivering the impact at the community level every single day, right? So we were talking about cuts, right, of funding, right? So we have to understand that the cuts of funding that have been happening in the past years are really have been impacting those actors that still keep on on providing that impact, right? They were historically anyway mostly excluded from the funding, right? That though, what's happening, the delivery of services that are essentials like food, health, and so on, is mostly happening through local entrepreneurs, through 80%. 80% of the people who are delivering those services are local entrepreneurs. They're only receiving 3%, right? So that's something we'll discuss later. But key here is that there is a real reason why it's really important for those entrepreneurs, those local actors to come together right? It is to try and be more efficient together to be able to keep on delivering the service better. There's another reason why it is important to do so, to come together and work collaboratively, is to try and build the world of tomorrow, right? Like currently, we are like facing the consequences of a system that was already dying. It had been a long time, I'm sure you were talking about that we were saying the system must be reformed. No, it has to be transformed, right? And the real way to transform a system is, to me, through co-creation, right? Because that means inventing together something that does not yet exist. It means creating it together, co-creating. So that's the distinction that I wanted to raise today, the distinction between co-creation and collaboration. Earlier, Andrew, you were talking about your love of sports, you were talking about the need to identify gaps and see what is it that we can do to reach a certain set of outputs. What I want us to be able to understand that is really like what's happening at the level of the ground is that we want to live in a world that is different from the world in which we are today. We need to try and come together in the spirit of not knowing what is it that we are going to be building, but knowing that we are building it together, right? So if we want to compare collaboration and co-creation, that would be like if I'll be telling you all, okay guys, let's have a wonderful picnic like on the Champ de Mars in front of the Eiffel Tower at 7 p.m. tonight, right? There would be two ways we could do it. Everybody goes back home or go to a restaurant and get some food, and we go and we sit there and we eat next to each other. Or there might be another way. We all go to the Champ de Mars and we figure out our own kitchen, our own ingredients, we come up with a meal and we make something together from the ground up. Right? This is co-creation. And obviously, it's more complex, right? It's a tiny complex.
Yeah, thanks a lot to explain the differences. How social entrepreneur can scale and bridge the gap, according to what you just mentioned.
So just before we get there, I want to share a few ingredients, right? To make the idea of co-creation something that is concrete. There is no one way to co-create. There is no one way to organize and create together. But there's some key principles, key guidelines that keep on coming back in what is that manages people to create new things together, right? So one of the very important things is that we need other people to join force with, right? It sounds like obvious, but it's not that easy to find others. We need to be able to have a clear why. Why is it that we are coming together? It connects to what we were saying earlier. We also need a clear identity. What do we stand for? A clear narrative and vision. What words do we believe in? And we need to also have a space where we can experiment on how to make a vision this reality. And you were touching earlier on the question of governance, right? Those spaces, they really need to have a culture and infrastructures that are designed to foster trust, curiosity, emergence, experiments, and learning. Right? Those are really important components for us to be able to co-create things together. And ideally, and this is where things are far from being real, but it's not preventing us to be able to come together, create things, we need an environment that makes it easier for us to be able to work collectively, right? So policy or the financial instruments that incentivize collective efforts, building relationships, and innovating collectively, rather than what we have today, which is competitive solutionalism and being focused and obsessed on rigid outputs. So those are really important things. And just one thing is that we can do all of this, but if we do not pay attention to breaking away from the pitfalls that led us to where we are today, we're going to build the same world all over again. So it's really important that we use those principles and we co-create thinking that is really important, for example, to bring the people who are close to the ground, close to the issues, to the table, and I would argue at the head of the table, so that everything that is created moving forward take into account the needs of the people. And there's never anyone again who asks, why do people's lives matter?
Yeah, thanks a lot. I'm checking the schedule, but you still have time to talk and take questions. So let's come back to the question that I had before, thanks to explain the ground. How social entrepreneur can scale, so, and bridge the gap, that was a question, and then maybe you can just directly go straight to a concrete example that you may have.
Yeah.
Then it will be more explanative for the audience.
So once we have like those co-creation of space happening, right, and we discussed built with these different principles that the activities happening, what's most needed is to be able to power those efforts and have them scale. And by like talking with the 6,500 members that we have in our network, we have been able to understand that the clear issues, the clear needs, aside from the one of funding that we touch on, other one of access to power and visibility. People are reporting constantly to feel that they're unheard and unseen. On the other side, when you talk to people, so I have a different experience of civil servant, right? Like I've heard from many people that have been working with us, social innovators, an appetite to work with us, and a clear, we need to work with you. Right? So there is a need on both sides, a recognized value proposition in working together. The issue is not, do we need to work together, how do we bridge the gap? So what Catalyst is also interesting here, because it works really in a way to try and bring those proximate leaders closer to where power exists and power works. So there are three things very concrete that are happening right now that we are doing that I think might be interesting for the audience to know. Like, there is what we call the Social Innovation House, which is a space where I know like some of you have been, where that happens on the side of the biggest event of the multilateral agenda, like Davos, like we were mentioning the Schwab Foundation before, of the World Economic Forum, but also UNGA, the UNGA COP, and that kind of events, right? Where you have really like leaders from the world that are gathering. Catalyst brings people from the ground to those spaces, so there are conversations that can happen together in the what's called the Social Innovation House. There are also concrete projects that are happening to try and reinvent the way the multilateral system might be serving people who are working at the level of the community. For example, Catalyst has been partnering closely with the local 2030 coalition. That is an initiative of the United Nations to develop a platform to finance localization of the SDGs. And the idea is to create a space where the UN system, governments, and social innovators can co-create together the financial tools that are going to enable action at the level of the ground and have it properly financed. And finally, there's one more thing that we're doing. And we've been touching a lot on funding, and I've been showing how it's inadequate at the moment. Something that is about to launch and will be debuted in 3 weeks from now at the Squad World Forum is to try and invent between with funders a new way to finance impact, right? And for the first time in the world, to make sure that social innovators that are detecting the agenda is shaping it with the world of finance.
Okay, thanks a lot. I have signed in the cell. I had a question, but we're going to ask first the public if they have questions. You have 5 minutes to ask questions. So if everyone wants to ask questions, just raise your hand, and I suppose someone will bring you a micro. I don't know who. In fact, I don't see, yeah, that's easier because I don't see anyone. Here. Yeah.
Hello. Happy to hear that SWOT analysis is still valid 4 decades after I studied it at INSEAD. I think today it could, the acronym could stand for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and Trump, because he is a threat to climate, to the environment, to migrants, to human health, to democracy itself. So, of course, when I hear someone say, why do human lives matter, it's shocking, it's a very callous statement, but at least it's a question and you can answer and maybe have some kind of a dialogue. But when Trump slashes funding for human health programs, which are forecasted to lead to millions of deaths, to me, that is far more offensive and horrifying. So my question is, why isn't Europe stepping up to make up for those losses? you mentioned that the UK has this law that it should invest 0.7% of its GDP in development, but my understanding is that that has been cut back in order to spend more on defense. So,
Okay, just try to be consistent. We have another question.
Yeah, that UK law was disbanded 3 or 4 years ago. It lasted for 13 years. For 13 years, it was enshrined, and the UK was really at the top, at the forefront of living up to those global commitments. In the US, in the end, the cuts were lower than what had been the budget cuts. So it's a bit complicated in the US because you have two realities. You have what's in the books, what's in the Budget Act, and that's been actually less bad, less awful than had been originally feared, because Congress basically didn't want to such a U-turn. And then you have the actual pipelines to get the money where it's needed, and because this agency was destroyed, was just obliterated, they have the money in the books. They don't have the pipelines. They don't have all the pipelines to get it to people, but they're working on that. So just to say that Congress has softened the blow to some extent. It's still a very bleak picture. It's not as bleak as in the first few months of last year.
Okay, thanks. You will be able to ask questions after the talk as well, but I can take just one more question.
And maybe one clarification. The exact pushback we had on saving lives was why should we protect saving lives within the budget for Africa, instead of protect the budget lines for French companies to operate ODA programs in Africa, or for bilateral loans to middle-income countries. If I'm going to be, if I'm going to give it the full details, that's the pushback we had.
Yeah, thanks. Another question, and after promise you can talk to them just after the talk.
Hello, I'm up here. My name's Julia Ratcliffe, and I'm a graduating student from a master's program in Sciences Po on international development. Sorry, I'm up here, if you can't see me. And I'm graduating into a world of development that is pretty fragmented and completely upended. And I'm wondering if you're trying to reframe development and aid as security to keep donor countries engaged, where does that leave co-creation between social entrepreneurs, the countries they're operating in, and donor governments? And does that ecosystem work, or is everybody operating against each other at that stage?
Well,
maybe someone. No.
It's a big question, isn't it?
Well, I think the previous question was easier. So,
right now the systems are fragmented, right? Everybody's in silos. That's why we need those spaces where we come together. That's why we need to develop those skills of co-creation. It really is a muscle, isn't it? It's not the kind of things that we are used to doing. So we need to come together anytime that we get a chance to learn how we build trust, and we learn how we operate together. So it's really about developing that culture and that practice of coming together in the big fora, but also in everyday's conversation.
I would say my experience of co-creation is that because, as Valeria was saying, it's more time-consuming because it's deeper. I've struggled to do co-creation on a large scale. So we do co-creation in my organization. There's ups and downs. There's years where we do it more within our ecosystem. Sometimes it shrinks. I would say that in the environment we're in, we're actually doing more of that, just because it's so challenging, because we're all grasping at straws to reinvent how we operate, and in our case, how we exert policy influence. So, don't take the thing about finding those new voices with the military or the corporates as an indication that we're doing less co-creation. I think we're doing a little more, actually, but we're expanding the scope of who we co-create with.
Okay, we must stop. I see big sign for the next stage. Thanks a lot for everyone. You will have time to ask them all the questions that were not asked just after. And thanks a lot for your participation. I hope it was useful for you.
Thank you so much, Valerie, Andrew, Khalil, and Laurence, for this amazing conversation and for giving us the frameworks, but also very concrete examples from the ground and from your work. I'm looking at our partners from Schwab Foundation to help me with the number of social enterprises that we have right now. I saw Sophie here. I think it's like in millions. There are millions of social enterprises do the job like every day and create real-world impact. But what is often missing is the consistent institutional support and some specific methodologies to make the change happen. So our next panel will be talking exactly about that. So to introduce the speakers and to chair the panel, I would like to invite to the stage Aline Sarah. Aline is a social entrepreneur. She is the co-founder of Nata Kalam. She is a Cartier Women Fellow. Cartier Women Initiative Fellow. She's also the winner of the Schwab, I have the long one for you, of the Schwab Foundation Award of the Best Social Entrepreneur and an INSEAD graduate. Welcome, Aline, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Hope you guys are still awake and not feeling too warm in this room. I'm feeling a little bit warm. Before introducing our panelists, I just would like a show of hands of who here today is feeling hopeful. Okay, so who here is not hopeful? And don't be shy. Okay, well, maybe a dozen? Okay. And who is unpronounced in between? Okay. So this panel is going to zoom out a little bit on systems, and then we're going to try and find some concrete tools to help social innovators do the work they're doing in this very challenging world. Where, as we've talked about, the ecosystem is changing and quite rapidly. So I'm here and happy to be interviewing here. Let me just pull out my notes, excuse me. Naoko Kawaguchi, Senior Coordinator for Strategic Foresight at the OECD, and Otto Scharmer, who is a Senior Lecturer at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and co-founder of the Presencing Institute and its U School for Transformation. So I'm going to start with you, Otto. If you can bring us back to the higher level on the systems front and the historic perspectives, as well as where we are today and your approach to transformation.
Thank you. So, hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. So maybe to continue the conversation we just heard, and to set the stage for the next round, two distinctions that essentially deal with change and governance in a world that is, as we all know, ruptured and fractured in many ways, increasingly. And the first distinction is essentially about systems thinking. And also the fact that we deal with systemic issues that you can't just drop on social innovators. Not all issues can be solved with individual initiatives. And so the distinction here is just kind of about levels of systems change. And we all have seen this kind of picture many times. What is systems thinking? It's essentially dealing with leadership and change in a way that is not just stuck by reacting to the symptoms, but understanding and addressing the root issues. That's really what it is. And what I would say the state of the art of systems thinking today is deep systems thinking. So you need essentially all 4 levels. It's not enough just the symptoms. It's not enough just tinkering with process and structure. But we all know that if you want to see real change, you need to change the mindsets. You need to address the kind of 2 deeper levels. So let me quickly share kind of the 4 things that we, from the Presencing Institute as an action learning and action research institute, have been learning by doing over the past 2 decades or so. Number 1, you cannot change a system unless you transform consciousness. So let me give you the McKinsey version of this. You cannot change a system unless you transform the mindsets of the people who are enacting that system. Why is that? Because if you just change structure and process, the same people in a new structure will reenact the same problems with the same mindset. So we all know that. Everyone, says there's really, who has gone through an episode of change knows that. The real question is something else. How? And that's number 2. You can't transform consciousness unless you make a system see and sense itself. And the seeing itself is classical systems thinking, nothing new. But what we learned really is the sensing. Unless you feel what it feels like on the other side of the divide, I'm very unlikely to maybe give up some of my own privileges. So, or factor in the well-being of others in my own decision-making. So it's, that's number 2. Number 3, you can't actualize future possibilities unless you're sensing and embodying the future. We all know that line of be the change you want to see in the world. It's really that, but what really boils down to is kind of feeling it, feeling the future, and embodying it in order to radiate that in your own context. And that is a skill, a capacity that needs to be strengthened. And lastly, as many of us know here in the room, you can't do any of these things unless, and that's, I would say, the number 1 learning from a half a century of change management, unless you create a support structure that offers tools, practices, and holding spaces. Many CEOs today know we need transformation. They can give you the objectives, and yet it's not happening. Why? Because they don't know really kind of the specifics about the support structure. And that's, I think, where the work of many of us in the room here comes in. So that's kind of the first distinction. And just kind of to close with the other one real quick, we talked about, it's the title of the session here, right? Post-Multilateralism. So I want to just offer a distinction here. What really does that mean? And so how do we think about the evolution of governance? 4 different types. 1.0 is basically unilateral dominance. Egocentric way of, there's one center, right? And that's kind of dominating. There is no reciprocity. We all know where that is coming from. It was mentioned, right? It's the T of the SWOT. And so, but it's not limited. He is the symptom. He is not the root issue, right? He is the symptom of something that we face in many of our systems, as you said, Valeria, that were broken before. 2, system-centric, right? That's kind of really the transactional bilateral. That's the laissez-faire model, that's kind of decentralized market coordination. And we know how great it is in many ways. And we also all know all the weaknesses, kind of the externalities, which really has led historically to the 3.0, more equal, we have like now civil society comes in, social innovators, we have multilateral frameworks, rule-based order, all of that. That's basically the story of the last 100 plus years. That's kind of what we went through. What do we see now? One part of the system moving back from 3.0 to 1 and 2.0, and the other one, and I guess many of us here in this room, leaning forward into something that I would call cosmocentric or awareness-based polycentric. And polycentric does not only mean localizing and regionalizing and place-based. Of course, it does that also. But it also means the different sectors working together. It's not just government, right? It's particularly the business players, the entrepreneurs, the social entrepreneurs. And for that to work, we need new spaces. We need new qualities of relationship. We need new spaces for co-sensing opportunities and organize around them. And that, I believe, is the core challenge today. Kind of these kind of deeper holding spaces that in some cases we see, particularly locally, but often on a supranational level, are missing. So in my view, kind of this second one is, what is our current moment? We live in 4.0 realities that we respond to with largely with 1.2, 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0 mechanisms of governance. But what the current crisis is really calling for is the polycentric awareness base of operating.
Thank you so much, Otto. That was very interesting and very enlightening. You mentioned a need for institutional support and tools, notably for social innovators. Naoko, I know that at the OECD, you've been working a lot on strategic foresight. Can you share a little bit about the work and go into more depth of the tools and how those might enable social innovators?
Yeah, thanks, Eileen. Thanks, Otto, as well. I don't know how many of you here know what strategic foresight is. So since Otto has explained some systems of governance, I just want to give you some structural disciplines on how to respond to the current governance gaps, for example. So strategic foresight, as many of you might know, it's a structured discipline. So it's very different from forecast or prediction or projection, because those are the approaches that sort of goes back and look at past data, past trends, and assumes that the past trend will make a linear sort of path into future. So there will be no surprises, no shocks. The condition persists. So foresight fundamentally challenges this, because the future for foresight is essentially uncertain. So any shocks can occur, any disruptions can occur, and most interestingly, any disruptions can co-occur. So multiple different disruptions could occur at the same time. So what we try to do is to think about all those different disruptions, to think about what kind of assumptions we have in the current sort of strategies, if you are government officials or corporate leaders, for example, and try to stress test your current strategies against all those possible disruptions, and think about the scenarios that could unfold, and think about what you may want to do so that you can withstand those shocks. So that's basically sort of foresight. So foresight looks at risks, like I just said now, but it also looks at opportunities, because there are, in the system, you may be close to sort of, say, positive breakthrough in some of the issues. And the actions you take today can catalyze the chance tomorrow and the change tomorrow. So that's sort of foresight in a nutshell. Just going back, because we have Otto here, who also has an affiliation with Club of Rome, I just wanted to say that foresight in the OECD, it was born in 1975 in reaction to oil crisis, also in reaction to rising inflation, also in reaction to environmental warning from Club of Rome on limits to growth. And also, in order to think about how to deal with sort of rising demand from developing countries and how to live in harmony with those countries. So the questions back then was basically how to rethink growth. Again, coming back to Club of Rome's initial mandate as well. How to rethink about growth, particularly in developed economies, when resources are scarce, when energy price is not cheap, when the balance with developing countries are sort of like fluctuating. This project, which was a few years project, came up with 6 scenarios. And the constraints that we found was not essentially sort of resource constraints in the end. It was sort of governance constraints. So those 6 scenarios found out that there were constraints in terms of limits for countries to be able to cooperate or to accept interdependency. All those sort of governance issues, which is stark reality and stark parallel to what we have today, especially in the context of war in Iran as well. Basically the same context, and soaring energy price, the rising energy price, rising inflation, and also in order to deal with the international governance mechanism that is evolving with regional blocs coming up, many countries trying to think about strategic alliance based on different sort of issues. So the structural parallel is starkly similar to 50 years ago, where foresight was born in the OECD. So what I'm trying to say is not that 50 years ago the issue could have been tackled, but it wasn't. What I'm trying to say is that these are sort of constant exercise. What economic models, which also the OECD does, it thinks about what happens if the current condition holds, so if it persists. What foresight does is what happens if it doesn't, so if the current condition doesn't persist. So that's sort of where we want to get at today. And just to give a quick overview of the toolkit that we have. So that's sort of like the concept and ideas. So then how do we actually practice foresight or implement foresight or embed foresight in, ventures like Eileen's? We do have this 5 steps guideline. So basically, foresight is about being aware of, so coming back to your point about sense making, about your assumptions. So think about your assumptions. And think about, for example, if we come back to Eileen's case, for example, some of the ventures might assume that your funding source will persist, or government budget will continue to persist, and that your funding will be secured. That is a big assumption that could be overturned by something like today's war, where much of the budget is spent on defense. So that's the first step. And the second step is to think again about what happens if different sort of disruptions occur. And then the third step is to then come up with scenarios where those different disruptions occur. And then the fourth is to sort of stress test your strategy against the scenarios that you came up with. And then the fifth and the final is to think about then what will be the no regret options, no regret actions, and also maybe good bet actions that, maybe there is a risk, but maybe you can have a bit of a win. But then you also think about contingency plans if everything fails. So that foresight is not about prediction. It's not about if you've predicted everything right or the scenarios you came up with actually happened. it's about the brain exercise, that you think about many possible scenarios to make sure that your strategy is proved and stress tested by many of the possible things that can happen, so that if some of it happens or similar things happen, you can be agile to changing. So that's just in a nutshell. Yeah.
Thank you. I think probably social innovators are naturally doing this. I think otherwise it's tricky for them to survive. And I would say, and I think there are a lot of social innovators in the room, but I think a lot of the lessons we've learned is to be very agile, just as you said, be nimble. I think compared to the development world, I think the startup mindset in particular pushes you to be go for prototyping, quick prototyping, testing things on a small scale rather than being full scale first. And I would say those are elements that help social innovators stay alive. And of course, their journey is after how do you scale after. I actually, before doing some of my follow-up questions, I'm curious if any of the social innovators would like to intervene and ask a question, because I know sometimes time runs out, and I think the audience is, for me, the most interesting. So we actually have one question there. We can hear you.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Hi, I'm Emily. I am currently an investor in social innovation, and I've been a social innovator. I'm also an MBA 21J. And actually, I really appreciated your question at the beginning, Aline, about who's feeling hopeful, who isn't. I am sorry to say that I'm not feeling very hopeful today. I was a little bit, when I hear these frameworks, I'm surprised that we're not talking about the fact that our society currently does not chronically undervalues environmental and social risk, and that we can be talking about frameworks that have existed for 60 plus years. I understand the value of a SWOT analysis, but we need to change the way fundamentally we value these core elements of our humanity. And I would like to hear the panelists speak a little bit about how we, as a global community, start to address this question.
Do you want me to go first? So I think that's spot on what you say. And so it's interesting, right? We live really in a world of collapse. And if you are paying attention, you know we live in a world of collapse. It was the opening of this conference. 7 out of 9 planetary boundaries. We heard the numbers right now, kind of all the money that should go into transition to regenerative is now moving into defense, and we are increasingly killing ourselves and each other. And then it's kind of this, I would say that's the easy stuff, right? The really serious stuff is the loss of agency. That most people on this planet right now, which is 2 out of 3, would love to contribute to a different story of the future than the one that's playing out now. But they don't know how, because 2 out of 3 people feel what happens in my institution, in my community, in my country has nothing to do with me. That's where we are. Where do you not feel this crisis? In business schools. So I'm saying that because I'm teaching there. And so if the world is going to hell, only, either, right, what we teach as business schools is just irrelevant, right? Doesn't matter anyway. But if it has some relevance, we are teaching the wrong stuff. Right? It's one of those two things. And it's not about adding more electives. Because that's what we have been doing the past decade plus. I'm not saying, I mean, I'm part of this, right? So it's not, I'm not like finger pointing at anyone. And yet, I'm just saying the obvious. I have been holding over the past, together with my colleague Michael Pearson, over the past year, probably 10 events in business schools across regions, really, world regions. Like basically saying, hey, what's wrong, right? Why are we part of a story that keeps moving us towards collapse, rather than being, as we heard early on, right, being a force for good, being a force for human and planetary flourishing. Why can't we be more active there? And I am surprised how many people are frustrated about what we do right now. On the faculty, on the side of deans, we know it already from students, right? But also on the level of alums. And I think we need to all show up to address that, because personally I believe the business school of the future can be a major force for good. It's exactly what we need. Because this 4.0 stuff there, right, kind of the deep sensing capacities and the co-creativity and kind of bringing in the different scenarios of the future, that needs a holding space. We don't have those holding spaces. Business schools and universities in general could be one of these holding spaces. And I think there is like ample of opportunity there, but we are just at the very beginning. So your question, I mean, your intervention is totally spot on.
Yeah, I would add, thank you for that question. I think it's very relevant, and it's a lot of us are feeling this way. Would anyone like to follow up on that question? Anyone have? Yes.
May I speak louder enough?
Yes, we hear you very well.
So Jean Monnet, one of the founders of Europe, said, mankind only sees change in necessity and only sees necessity in crisis. So should we eventually say, well, let's start and actually accelerate the collapse you see, so that we have a micro collapse, and don't try to damage too much, or we keep on going trying to sort of put band-aids and greenwashing what we do in a business school, so that we keep the thing going, but then the collapse will be even bigger. So is there a middle ground? Is there a way to collapse, like fail fast is some of the lessons from California. Can we fail fast soon enough so that we don't damage too much the environment and still keep staying ahead?
It sounds like a question for business school.
Well, I mean, I think it's a really matter of experience, I would say. What I have seen is collapse alone doesn't guarantee you the good outcome. And what you really need is collapse and making the system sense and see itself, right? We need to realize that we need to do something different. It's not just them or someone else. And essentially, when systems collapse, what happens? What is it we are left with? We are left with each other. We are left with our qualities of relationship. We are left with how we relate to the land, to each other, kind of to our sense of purpose. And it's kind of, I think, what we need to do, it's like waiting for the collapse, I think, is just organized irresponsibility. What we need to do is, because it's unnecessary suffering, I think what is missing is not the failures of system. What's missing is the awareness that makes us see ourselves in our own behavior in these patterns, in these outcomes, and the capacity, kind of to the rapid cycle prototyping, to really explore new ways where business schools, and where particularly I think young people and universities in general could be a major force for good, which is actually what many people want. So I think kind of this shift from reflection to agency, that is a piece that is not happening by itself. It's not guaranteed, but that's really what good leadership is, and that's kind of what we are short of at this point.
Are there other questions?
Thank you very much. I am Dupe Kilakafidipe from Nigeria, Cartier Women's Initiative Fellow 2023, also INSEAD 2023. I am a social entrepreneur. My question initially was for the previous panel, but it's still relevant. Many of us working in emerging markets, we are confronted by extremely fragmented ecosystems that are still in their nascent developmental stage. So I would like to propose and ask maybe if there are, specific mechanisms that can create spaces or solutions that aggregate capital, policy, and the operators for, for the future as a solution.
I'll just jump in from the perspective of a social entrepreneur from, so I'm originally from Lebanon, but I'm also American, and this is just a small suggestion for all of those entrepreneurs in those countries that are perpetually in, crisis and war and so forth. One thing I've noticed is the diaspora, those who are originally from that country but are living abroad, have a passport from a Western country, are great enablers and contributors in general to help those organizations. So that's actually just a very kind of tactical observation I've had. Now, excuse me, on the larger question, I will let the other panelists speak, but I think they're all, it's the challenges of just fragile states, and what we're talking about here is that we should be prepared for all kinds of scenarios and have this kind of anticipatory approach. But maybe, Naoko, would you maybe want to comment on this?
Yeah, well, can I just also quickly comment on the previous question? So just coming back to the collapse, and then I'll just jump into that one. So yes, I do agree with the previous comment about the fact that we do need, we do think about things when it's necessary, and the OECD does also do that reflection, which also goes back to the first question, just bundling all the questions. Institutions like the OECD, we established in a completely different setting with a mandate that may not even stand today, where the global governance is also changing. Foresight, I want to go back. By doing foresight with member countries, we're always surprised that policymakers really like to think about dystopian futures, because that's when they can think about what to do. So when we draw scenarios, we think about utopian futures, which is basically kind of ChangeNOW would like to follow, and then try to backcast and think about what we can do so that we can get there. Policymakers tend to think in a very different way, that in the world of dystopia, well, for example, we had this exercise on AI global governance, for example. What if technology and some of the multi-tech companies and those things outpace governance that we have today? That will be a huge dystopia for policymakers. We need to think about how to reinforce and strengthen global governance in that field. but it doesn't really trigger a lot of sympathy when we think about the world that we want. That's kind of the reality. So I just wanted to say that in that sense also foresight helps because, well, ultimately you do want policymakers to act, whatever the means is. If necessity is the ingredients, then that will be it. So do agree with you, but some of the things that foresight can provide through scenarios is to show what kind of dystopia we will be if no action is taken, so that that will reflect on the policy tomorrow.
I'm going to take one more question. Khalil, I think I saw your hand.
Fascinating. Both of you point to governance being what's missing. It's what's missing in order to get to level 4, Otto. And now, Ko, you're saying in terms of government being able to actually address those special risks identified through the foresight exercise, that I think you were alluding to the fact that we're ill-equipped, besides your shop, in having the governance to address those risks. My question is, do you see pathways where the governance systems would change? Like, what are the politics to changing those governance systems so that we actually implement the lessons from the foresight exercises, and so that we shift to level 4?
We're going to need quick responses.
So the short answer is absolutely yes. And I think kind of that is actually the exciting moment we are living in, because yes, we see the collapsing part. We see a profound wave of regeneration, that many of which happens on a grassroots and local and place-based and region-based level. But to some degree, in my experience, also happens inside the cracks of old institutions, right? Where leaders know there is we produce results that are not acceptable kind of for the core of the system and need help. And it's always about the same issues, which is how to move from extractive to regenerative business models, how to move from mindsets that are ego to eco, right, silo to a whole system, and how to move behaviors from reactive against patterns of the past towards sensing and realizing opportunities. We see a whole landscape of regeneration emerging right now, which is probably one of the most exciting moments for a long time to be around. And we see in many cases that profound change is not only more difficult because of all the noise, but also more possible because most people know what we currently do is not sustainable.
Well, yeah, great question. So, agree with you too. Coming back to the title of this session, Post-Multilateral Era, the question on governance and the evolving governance system. It's a massive question. Well, how do we say it? Again, we are in the time when what we thought the governance, well, global governance that we took for granted. For example, well, the OECD works with together with the G20, for example, that kind of multilateral cooperation is being eroded. Simply also because of the successive presidency of the Global South that enabled the hidden sort of voice to emerge, which is definitely changing the global systems. And also, well, again, like I said before, the regional blocs, strategic alliances, many of the underlying strategic issues are changing, evolving with many of the emerging technologies as well. that also has to be governed. The country's boundaries are also being eroded as well. Some of the issues like climate, we work also on thinking about the governance of, for example, earth cooling systems, which for many it's quite a taboo, but we do need to think about the governing all those emerging issues before it arises, because that's what happened with AI. Some of the patchwork responses will not suffice. So that's the sort of evolving sort of context that we live in, and the governance framework itself has to change. And well, the work that you do and also the foresight is going to be able to let us sort of imagine where we want to go and what will happen in this evolving sort of governance frameworks. So I hope that answered your question.
Thank you, Naoko. I'm going to have to wrap this panel up, so thank you so much for the insight. I think the main takeaways is that there's need for a bit of reform in certain institutions, so thank you so much, everybody.
So thank you, Naoko, and thank you, of course, Aline, for chairing this panel. I know, Otto, you're taking your flight, so we're trying to rush in. Thank you once again for everyone, for your engagement, for your difficult questions. Keep them coming. This is our last session for today. It's only 20 minutes, but it's extremely interesting because it sort of redefines the entire challenge and asks what if sustainability is not a constraint, but a growth driver. To talk about innovative principles, I'm very honored to invite to the stage Senior Affiliate Professor of Strategy, Felipe Monteiro, who is also the Academic Director of Global Talent Competitiveness Index. Felipe, over to you to get us going.
Good afternoon, everyone. Is this working or not yet? Is it? So super thanks to all of you for staying here until the end of the session. I was really nice hearing all the debate and reminded me, right, that in a good class discussions, it's much better to have discussions than just presentations. So I have a few slides for you, but what I would like to do, right, in the next 20 minutes is maybe put some ideas on the table that hopefully will complement a number of the issues we have discussed before, and then open for questions that you may have. So when I was thinking about today, it reminded me that last time I came to ChangeNOW was 2 years ago, and I was thinking, no, what changed in 2 years? And in the space of sustainability, and I guess things did not get easier. Right? So if we think about geopolitical uncertainty, economic instability, and the difficulties of proving return on investment, I'm not sure that any of those things are making the life of social entrepreneurs like you easier, although we may see different calculations now in terms of ROI as we see what's happening in the Gulf. So as someone who has the privilege of working in an academic institutions, my co-authors and I, what we were puzzled was, okay, it's a difficult environment. Typically in strategy, we see a lot of firm-level variance. Some companies choose different strategies. Can we see some companies, some large companies, which are really leading fundamental transformation in the way they operate that might move the needle? Okay, so that was our original question. And then, as a lot of us in digital transformation, we say, okay, let's go to Silicon Valley. Let's see what people in Silicon Valley is doing. If you go there, and I guess there may be some people here coming from the Valley, I'm not sure these are the companies that we would automatically associate with companies which are really pushing the frontiers in terms of sustainability transformation. So over the past maybe 3 to 5 years, what we have been realizing is that a lot of organizations which are really pioneers in sustainability transformation, they seem to be much more global than what we experienced when we were looking at who are the companies leading digital transformation. So maybe the first idea I'd like to leave with you is while, maybe 20 years ago, when we start looking in terms of digital transformation, there was a place to look for in terms of which are the companies leading that transformation. As we think about sustainability transformation, maybe this is much more globally distributed than what we typically associate when we think about just technology, right? And as you can think about AI today. So I'm putting here some of the names of some of the companies that we've been kind of writing about and interviewing, so on and so forth. And maybe what is common across all of them is we're really looking at really global, large multinationals. Okay? And our intent in doing so is it's not because those companies are better than others, but because those companies, if they change, if they transform, the impact that they can have is pretty remarkable. Okay? And I know that a lot of you, right, might be working with much smaller organizations, but I think what I've tried to show you throughout this presentation is that those really large global corporations that can really move the needle, they cannot do that without you. Okay? Or that a lot of the change necessary will not be done by those companies on their own. So our original research question is, okay, do we see anything that those companies tend to do that is different from others? Okay. And as you can imagine, it's not easy to kind of summarize all the complexity that is there. But we have just published an article which just appeared last month in the MIT Sloan Management Review, where with colleagues from Harvard Business School, INSEAD, what we try to identify and suggest, and that's what I have next for you, is what were those 5 common practices that we saw across those organizations? Okay? So for whatever it's worth, it might give you some ideas of what those companies are doing that seems to be different from other companies, but has some commonality on those who are leading transformation in their industries. So I think the first thing we identified was this idea that we should not be no surprise to you is how tough it is for those organizations to deal with dual challenge. Because on the one hand, we are not talking about sustainability at the cost of performance, but how do you balance sustainability and performance? And I think the tougher the environment is, right, the more headwind you get, the more you need to find a way of balancing those 2 challenges. And the second big challenge there, it is clear that as big as you could be as a large multinationals, you cannot do it alone. So this idea that a lot of what is required in terms of sustainability transformation has to go beyond your own boundaries. So what we identified were basically 5 different practices. I will put them on the table, then try to suggest some ideas of how I believe social entrepreneurs can play a role there, and then we open for any questions you may have. So I think the first thing we observed across those companies is really their focus on framing sustainability as a business opportunity. And very different sectors, okay? And maybe if you see some of those companies there, the idea and the framing they used, and I heard kind of the previous panels, people really said, how do we reframe things? I think the frame they used for a lot of their sustainability initiatives was, this could be new sources of growth for us. Okay? Maybe it's going to take some time, and maybe we'll not do this immediately with everyone. We have to work with some lead users who will be able to kind of start adopting those solutions. But it was not as a cost, was not as compliance, was not at, or just, that we're doing this because it's right, but it's framing as an opportunity. By the way, I'm not making any judgment call here and say, this is what you should do, or that's what's, I'm just sharing with you what we observed. And it's interesting, just as a context, right? We publish this paper in a moment, right, that those journals, they have a lot of pushback against sustainability. So it's also interesting, right, that within the business community, how people are trying to reframe the sustainability. The second thing that we observed there was this effort in working with mission-aligned lead users. And for those of you who think about lead users, it should not be kind of surprised, but many times it's not lead users in terms of mission, it's just lead users in terms of technology, people who are really the first ones to adopt. And really, I think what we observed here is their ability to work with lead users who are really committed to sustainability. So that was practice 2. I think practice 3 was the need to seek for new partners. And I think maybe when we say new partners here is not new in terms of people doing the same thing, but new people. It's really working with unusual partners, uncommon partners. Okay? Not the same ecosystem that you tend to work with, but a lot of what those companies were doing were going to work with partners that never worked before, that were not from related industries, so on and so forth. So we have seen across the board a big effort of engaging with very different partners. The fourth practice there was how we observed those firms really thinking, and I'm putting here thinking big about the future. It was very interesting to hear the previous panel talk about foresight and backcasting, so on and so forth. For those multinationals to justify those long-term investments, right, and the transformation necessary, they need to kind of create a narrative about the future that if you just try to, look at what's happening now, none of that would be approved, right? Or would be much more difficult for them to make sure that they engage and they get the traction necessary to move internally. So it's interesting to see the amount of effort in really future-backing thinking in terms of revealing things that we would not see in short term. And the final one, sorry, not this one. The final one, and I understand, right, one of the previous panels was exactly about coalitions. It was very interesting to see here an effort, and we're talking here about many countries, right? We're moving from, I don't know, Switzerland to Brazil to Morocco. A concerted effort, right, and a very purposeful effort on how we're going to make, right, how we're going to work in coalitions, right? We will not be able to do this by ourselves. We have to work with our lead users. We have to work with different partners, but also how do we engage in a coalition of institutions and organizations which can help us kind of push boundaries and move things together. This is kind of not the way many companies work, okay? So, and I think for those of us who study strategy and we always think about competitive strategy and this idea of how we would create coalitions, it is not trivial. So if you put those 5 things together, what I believe might be the implications for social entrepreneurs here, I think the first one is, right, some level of self-awareness in terms of the limitations. If the things are very difficult, right, and the challenges are really grand challenges, it's going to be very difficult that either large companies or startups or you or them or us would solve any of those issues by ourselves. So the need for partnership there, I think, is increasingly important. I think you bring to those organizations a level of experimentation and mission clarity that they don't have or they might be lacking. And I believe that your role in becoming more than just a solution provider, but how can you become innovation partners in systemic change is pretty important. I hope maybe there are two ideas as I share with you. I basically share, what studying certain companies, what we saw, some practices, but maybe there are two ideas there that might resonate with your experience. Maybe the first one is this idea of how do you frame or reframe sustainability as a growth opportunity, and two, how innovation is going to be at the core of that, and maybe three, how as we think about innovation, we mean innovation in a much more global and open fashion. So to wrap up and make sure that we have at least 5 minutes for Q&A, I hope, and those of you interested in reading the article, you're going to get much more detail than I could kind of quickly summarize today, is that maybe those practices can be kind of inspiring or informative, or maybe some of your organizations might be engaged in different parts of those practices. Although the environment from kind of 2 years ago to today is not it's not easier, or it is more favorable in terms of how do you push the sustainability agenda, I think that the need for collaboration and the role of social entrepreneurs is even more important for those multinationals. And I hope that you can help them, right, push that agenda of seeing the role of innovation and the possibility for growth as you think about sustainability. So this is what I wanted to say. Why don't I stop here? We have 5 minutes left, and then I have questions. There's one here.
Hi, Celia Chouquet, MBA 02D. I feel that one of the aspects that hasn't been addressed in this whole equation of the multi-crisis is actually the job market at the moment, especially for high-qualified senior executives in high-income countries. This has been 2 brutal years of forever restructurings, with many people unable to find full-time corporate employment. And how do we square that? We as change makers and INSEAD trying to prepare the talent for the future into this transition as well. What do we do with that talent that is now flooding the market, trying to do good, but also struggling to find the next opportunities? So I think we're seeing a breakaway of full-time corporate positions like never before in Europe. In US, this has started actually a while ago. How does INSEAD address this or square this with the teachings of the school?
Yeah. So I will leave our dean to explain how INSEAD does that more broadly, so it's very kind of much more than I could address. But let me maybe put 2 additional points here. First, right, I mentioned all this transformation, and I didn't even say anything about AI, right? So as you think about not only the sustainability transformation, but the AI transformation, the impact on job market, what you're describing. Just as one recollection, as Maria said at the beginning, I'm also the director of the Global Talent Competitiveness Index. And I remember in 2020, we had a report that was about global talent in the age of AI. And I remember interviewing the EU commissioner responsible for jobs. And the first thing that he said, listen, it's very clear that how much we need to work together, jobs and the transition, right, in terms of sustainability transition, because the impact on jobs will be immense. So I think my sense, being pragmatic from what I saw working with those organizations, is I think the role for a lot of the very senior executives, very well qualified, kind of our MBA grads, is maybe how do you redefine your careers, or maybe become sources of innovation and growth for those organizations, maybe the jobs will be redefined. The jobs will be will take a different a different scope that I think none of us know exactly where they're going to go. But maybe there's something there in the extent of seeing or looking for growth opportunities and bringing a level of entrepreneurship. So I don't think that those organizations, as much as they're restructuring, they need less of entrepreneurship. I think they will need more of entrepreneurship. So I think maybe is that, which is a big change for a lot of business schools, right? A lot of our students want to have jobs in large corporates, right? A lot of our students today, they really want to be entrepreneurs. And so I think that change, maybe it's also a broader change. Thank you. I think there's a question in the back.
Yes.
Yeah. So let me give one example from what we observed, okay? So a number of you might be familiar with the question, sorry, yes. The question was, this is nice, but the financial system is not prepared for that. So how do you go for an outdated, how you do those things in an outdated financial system? It's more or less what you said. And I was going to share an example, a clear example that we saw here in our sample of firms. So you might be familiar with the utility company called Enel, right, originally from Italy. So it was very interesting as we interviewed, right, the chief innovability officer. They put together sustainability and innovation together. The effort they had working with the financial department to come up with different types of bonds, different types of financial solutions, which to me, what it implied is that it required, even for those companies, to change their own internal financial, systems, right? And the way that their financial area works together with the financial market. So, I mean, a clear example of this, right, and you might be familiar with it, is when you issue those sustainability-linked bonds, okay? The impact that this will have, regardless of change in leadership, is it's a typically long-term commitments that you make. But there were pioneers in changing this. So maybe, right, the innovation is required also in the financial systems. And I believe that some of those large companies can play a pioneering role in pushing that agenda. That's at least what we observed there. Maybe we have time for one final question, or we've done. Maria is
well, I just wanted to say that Felipe is joining us at the network.
I am.
And you can ask the questions.
That's fine with me.
Let's give a huge round of applause to Felipe. I promised you another special guest to close today's forum, so it's my huge pleasure to welcome to the stage Atalaya Tasu, who is the Professor of Operations and Technology Management, and also the new Academic Director of the Hoffman Institute. Atalaya, welcome, over to you.
Thank you all very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for taking the time to listen to our esteemed guests. Thanks to our guests for their wonderful and insightful conversations. Now, I have a couple of observations, and before that, I do have a homework to do. As soon as we are done with the networking event, I'm going to go home, check out the teaching frameworks that I have, and cross out every T that I see in those frameworks. Joking aside, I think there is a bit of a surprising observation on my end, seeing that the amount of hope in the audience was not as high as I would have hoped it to be. So I am actually part of the hopeful crowd in the sense that I believe strongly that humanity has faced many challenges in the past, but we always found a way to come back from systemic collapses. But how do we get there? And how do we get there is very much related to the kind of conversation we had in this auditorium. We talked about ecosystems. We talked about partnerships. So bouncing back from the challenges that we face or preempting those systemic collapses has a lot to do with what our speakers have shared with us today. That's my opinion. You know, we've learned that ecosystems are fundamental to getting to scale or getting to good solutions in an impact context, be it related to entrepreneurship or anything else. The grand challenges of today necessitate ecosystem thinking. They also necessitate thinking beyond our established boundaries. For instance, what I heard from Khalil today was very instrumental, and I will remember it for the rest of my teaching career, I would say. There is a lot beyond what we see here, and there is a lot room for growth, opportunities, or scalable impact in Africa. So that's something I'm going to carry with myself. More importantly, I would maybe assign a homework as an academic for the crowd in this auditorium. It may be a good time to think about not pointing fingers as to what is not working in the system, but maybe opening our arms wider to think about how we can create collective impact. So I would welcome you all to join us in the networking event with your arms open and ready to hug your peers. Thank you very much.
Woo! Thanks a lot. It's amazing. Thank you so much. So about the networking reception, there is a slide that is about to come up. Yes. While you're looking at the slide and trying to figure out where the reception is, I would like to take the last 30 seconds to say thank you. Thank you to ChangeNOW for giving us this opportunity, this beautiful partnership. Thank you to all of you in the room for this level of engagement, for the difficult questions. It was excellent. You are excellent, and we really appreciate you. Thank you, of course, to our speakers. You've been shaping our programs for many years now. It's a true honor to have you here with us. Thank you so much. And I would like to also thank all the teams who worked on this. It's not a one-person act, no, one team act. So there were many ChangeNOW teams here helping us today, and many INSEAD teams, and I would like to mention all of them. I forgot my notes, so if I forgot someone, I'm sorry. It's INSEAD events team, communications team, alumni relations and advancement, Brandon, Centers Initiative, and the Hoffman Institute team. Thank you all so much. Take care and see you soon.